Tonight. Everybody have their microphones on. First of all, we need to verify if the meeting is posted, and Cindy Mathias. Cindy, was the meeting properly posted prior to this?
Were you going to give me $5?
Lori can confirm that.
Yes.
Ms. Clifton, okay. I don't want to get fined on my very first chair position. I know Dan's here to wish me off well, but
So far, you're good.
so far I'm good. Okay, so welcome everybody to the F&F meeting tonight. First, we have a general business. The first order of general business is verify the meeting is properly posted per state law and state legislation. And the second thing on the agenda is opportunity for citizens to speak or correspond with the board. I have no correspondence for the board, other than one of the people tonight did express their opposition to the renaming of Central Middle School that's on the agenda for tonight. We do have speakers for tonight. Each speaker will be giving approximately 3 minutes. I'll watch my watch, and I'll give you a little leeway, but not a whole lot, because we do have several speakers to get through tonight and a long agenda. So first on the speaker list is Mr. Ben Thiel. Ben? Mr. Thiel, would you step right up, and or you, if you wish. We usually like to have it go into microphone so it stays on the record. And
Hi, my name is Ben Thiel, and I'm a 1945 graduate of Waukesha High School, when there was only one high school in Waukesha. Then South High School was built, and the old high school was named Central Middle School to distinguish its location. As North and West high schools were added, my old school retained its location and name as Central Middle School. A few of us octogenarians spoke at last month's Finance and Facilities Committee to voice our opposition to renaming our school. In response to our opposition, several words came out in rebuttal. One word was emotional. That's true. We are emotional. Perhaps we're even passionate about our opposition. Thanks to the good offices of Superintendent Todd Gray, there should be copies of petitions of 175 like-minded individuals in your packets. Several other words that came out were inspirational and inspiring students. We're speaking of 12, 13, and 14-year-olds, kids that are themselves just beginning the road to find their own identity, and in all likelihood really don't know who Les Paul was or what he accomplished, or even cared that he did. How is an unknown supposed to inspire them? Another word that came out of last month's meeting was innovation. I would suggest that this committee itself be more innovative in how to go about honoring Les Paul for what he did. One suggestion is to make the Assembly Hall in the Worthington building the Les Paul Auditorium. Perhaps deserving students could receive a Les Paul Award for musical merit, somewhat like a scholarship given to high school graduates. I'm sure there must be many other ways to acknowledge Les's accomplishments. Going back to that word inspire, the students' dedicated teachers are the ones who will inspire these 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids to become productive members of society and the community, just as they've been doing for more than a century. They're the ones who will do it, not the name on the school. Be innovative and inspirational yourselves in choosing a way to honor Les for what he accomplished. Now, if you allow me a small aside, my wife will attest that I'm a pack rat. I have in my hand the fragile, yellow, mimeographed 74-year-old handbook given to me when I entered the Lincoln Building in 1939 as a 12-year-old, in which my junior high teachers used the letters in Abraham Lincoln's name to inspire me to become a good citizen of the community. I hope they succeeded. They said, A is for ambition, B is for brave, R is for reliable, A is for agreeable, H is for honest, A is appreciative, M is for mannerly, L is loyal, I for industrious, N for neat, C for cooperative, O for obedient, L for law-abiding, and N for noble. If anyone would like to see this book, you're happy to take a look at it, but I'm going to take it back. I've saved it for too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thiel. The next speaker on the agenda is Schmitty Thiel. Schmitty, Mrs. Thiel.
I'm the one who does all that stuff. Sorry about this, but it takes us 3 minutes to get here.
Well, we're flexible tonight, so.
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak. We were sort of dismissed for being emotional, but I think we're, at this point, very proud that we're emotional because this is really important to us. We're the people who were alive during that depression when he left school. We know that he didn't leave school to support his mother because he and his mother didn't get along. They never did. She finished her days on the county. He didn't support her. The people who worked out there, and that was some of this class of 45, one of whom I'm married to, who actually would take up collections to buy flowers for his mother on her birthday, and then they would sign it, Les Paul. In other words, this was an ordinary man who did an extraordinary thing. But he really was a dropout because he wanted to quit school. He was a poor student. It was difficult for him. Perhaps he had a learning disability. Those things weren't identified those days. For whatever reason, he left. He did not support his mother, and he did not contact her. He would come back to Waukesha now and then, and he would go down to the tavern and play that guitar, and all of us from our generation, we'd go down there and listen to this extraordinary gift that this man had. So you really should not be naming a school. That's why we're out here. We're old, but we were there. We were there in the Depression. We know why he left. We know what he did. And we know that his whole life was music, not education. He lived his whole life for music. He was been compared to Lincoln. Why Lincoln? Lincoln lived and died before there was a public school system invented. Why Edison? Edison was sort of the Steve Jobs of the 19th century. He hired or got talented men with creative ideas, and he helped them develop them. That's kind of an insult to Les Paul because Les Paul did it all on his own. He did it all on his own. Don't compare him to people foolishly like that or ridiculously. He mattered because music was it, not education. You shouldn't be naming a school, an auditorium, a musical program, something like that. Music was his life. Education wasn't. This is wrong, just plain wrong. And the reason you've got all of us elderly is because we were there. We saw all of this. We lived all of this. For us, it is really real, and we're very emotional about this, and we're proud to be emotional. Thank you so much, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
And thank you for helping me with the pronouncement, Ms. Thiel. Next speaker is Sue Baker. Ms. Baker?
Good evening. I want to say right off the top that the last thing that the Les Paul Foundation would want is to have caused a problem. It is not the foundation's role to approach other organizations and freely offer the use of Les Paul's name. We are actually very protective of his name and often say no when people want to use his name. The idea was the foundation was approaching the school district and offering the use of Les's name as a start to what we hoped would be an ongoing relationship to support the school district and the students, and in particular, what is now Central Middle School. Obviously, there are people that are upset, and that's most unfortunate. It is not what any of us in the foundation wanted. We wanted to give what we thought would be considered a gift to the students of Waukesha and to the community. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Emmanuel Vitale.
You say you only get 3 minutes?
Well, I've been flexible tonight. It's a big decision, and I want everyone to have a chance to talk. I'll give you as much as Schmidt
Yeah,
had.
hi, I am Emmanuel Vitale. I wanted to thank Schmitty back here. She said a mouthful, and I agree with everything she said. I'm opposed to renaming Waukesha Middle School for with using Les Paul's name. I graduated in 1954. I spent 4 wonderful years there, great memories. And I enjoyed listening to Les Paul's music when he was with Mary Ford. He was great in the 50s and the 60s, but then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I never heard of him from again. And I don't ever remember him coming to Waukesha that much. I read the article in the Freeman, and Sue Baker made a comment that Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Edison didn't graduate from high school. Now, we're talking about 2 giants of American history, world history. I don't know how you can associate Les Paul with these 2 gentlemen, because in those days, many people hardly ever finish grade school, let alone high school. So, I was on the city council for 18 years. I mean, some people here might remember me. And the gentleman that follows me, Charles Betker, was an alderman for 35 straight years. I consider one of the greatest aldermen the state of Wisconsin's ever had. He's going to speak to you when I'm finished. But Les Paul has a highway named after him, 164. He has a band shell at the library park. He also has a significant portion of the county museum right over here on Main Street named after him. What are we going to do eventually? Name the whole city after this guy? You can't do that. There's got to be an end there somewhere. And I don't think it's right to name an entire school. You can name an auditorium if you want, or some other part of the school, because the auditorium would be significant in this case because he was a great musician. I'm not here to knock Les Paul. He was probably one of the greatest guitar players that ever lived, and he did invent the electric guitar, and that's all great. And whenever Les Paul always introduced himself in New York when he was going to play as the Wizard of Waukesha, that was fine and dandy there, but they don't know where Waukesha was on the map in New York. He should have been over here. He should have visited Waukesha more often, but he didn't. Now, that doesn't make him a bad person. He's still a very great musician. But to name a high school, and Waukesha High School is the only high school we had in those days. We didn't have South, North, and West, or even Catholic Memorial. All we had was good old Waukesha High. And I think you should take this into consideration before you go ahead. And as a matter of fact, I went to school with Pat over here. She was in a lot of my classes. You remember that, Pat?
30 seconds on this. Mr.
Okay.
Vitale.
I'm just gonna make this short and sweet. I'm opposed to it because I think you're going too far on this, okay? There are a lot of people here that are opposed to it. There are other people in this city also that are opposed that just maybe cannot get here and speak. Some people don't like to speak because it scares them for some reason, but I'm not one of them. But you gotta take this into consideration. You can name an auditorium if you want, or some other part of the school, but not the whole school. There are many people in this city that graduated from Waukesha High School. I don't think they want that name of that school changed at all, and I wish you would take that into consideration. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Okay, and our last scheduled speaker tonight is Charlie Bechtel. Bechter.
My name is Charlie Betker, longtime resident, City of Waukesha. There's one correction. I was not an alderman for 35 years. It was 38 years.
My apologies,
Charles. Yeah, that one's there.
But there's one thing that I hate to see the name change, because Central Middle School, it was the only high school, and it's probably the only high school and the oldest high school in Waukesha County. There's another reason why I hate to be changed, because there is a current name on that building, and it's Mr. Worthington. Mr. Worthington was a principal in excess of 30 years. And a lot of people aren't aware, but Mr. Worthington also started the vocational school, which we're in part of this evening. And and he started the vocational school. When he stepped down, Mr. Lindholm took over, which is the Lindholm building which we're in today. And he took it, and then when Lindholm stepped down, Mr. Tony Natalizio, probably a lot of people aren't aware of him, but he took it another step farther. He had the vocational school. He took it from here, and he took it out to WCTC, which is Waukesha County Technical College. And so I feel just like some of the other people. I feel Central Middle School should continue to be left as is, and something else could be done, because one of the reasons why we're here this evening is because Ellen Langell suggested that we could possibly name or do something else other than just naming the school. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And nobody else signed up, but if there's anyone else who'd like to speak to the issue now, they're certainly welcome. They just have to give their name and address.
I'm Paul Reese, Waukesha, Wisconsin.
Address, Paul?
841 Genesee Street.
Okay, thank you.
I grew up here in Waukesha. I moved here from West Bend. The first school I went to was Central Middle School. I started there in seventh grade, seventh and eighth. Was it 3 years? Anyways, it was sixth grade, I think it was. I went there for 3 years. Seventh and eighth grade is all it was for a middle school?
Oh, not the middle school.
When it was a middle school in 80, I think it was 6th, 7th, and 8th I went there. Anyways, besides the point, I don't feel an allegiance to the name Central Middle School, but I do feel an allegiance to the town of Waukesha, and I feel everything in this town is becoming Les Paul this, Les Paul Parkway, Les Paul, and there's just too, it loses its identity as a city by itself. If it was just Central that was being named that, I could almost see it. But it's not just Central, it's everything in this town, and I have a hard time with that. Les Paul was not a part of this town. Les Paul was from this town. And I think there's a big difference in those two things. He wasn't an active part, like they talked about Mr. Worthington and such. These were people who were a part of this town. Les Paul was from this town. And there's a pretty big distinction there, at least in my opinion. That being said, that building will one day be in rubble. And what is being taught inside that school is far more important than any name being placed upon it. How many people here know that there's a book in our middle school called Looking for Alaska, which depicts oral sex in it and foul language, amongst other things, that is in our middle school? And how many people will show up and give these people on the board a hard time about that garbage in our schools? That is my point when I get up here and speak. That is what I care about, is what is in these schools and what is going on in these halls. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak tonight? Okay, I thank everyone for their comments. I am pleased that people came tonight to comment. I wasn't at the last F&F meeting, so I didn't get a chance to hear directly the comments in the last meeting, so I appreciate everyone coming tonight. With that, we'll proceed on to our action items for tonight. First on the action item list is the approval of request to rename Central Middle School. Who should I ask to comment on this at this point in time? Mr. Gray or Ms. Clifton, which would prefer to?
I could certainly do that.
Okay,
Essentially, a couple months back, we were approached by the representative of the Les Paul Foundation, and they made a formal request. When that happens, there is a particular board policy that requires us to convene one committee of citizens and staff, and then another committee from the school, and then there could be a third potential committee with all school staff. Those committees were formed, and they made the recommendations that you have, that you had received, I think about 6 weeks ago, before the last board meeting. Very kind of split down the middle. Most of the committee had some concerns, but I think two of the committees barely recommended for it, and the staff also was, I think, 47% opposed, 53% for it. So it was a very close call, but those were the recommendations of the committees.
okay. I guess I'll open it up to, with no further input, I'll open it up to any discussion among board members or committee members. Mr. Edlin?
Thank you. There are a couple comments that I've been listening to and reading in the paper that I appreciate everybody's input on this, because it is a very emotional issue for a lot of people around town. There's a couple of things that I have to discount because they don't pertain to our Board of Governance. And one of them is Les Paul's name is plastered all around town. Whatever that case is, really, truly, you should be contacting your alderman or the mayor about that, because we don't have jurisdiction over any of the things that are outside of the school district of Waukesha. We have to be concerned about facilities, children, and staff. We're a division of the state of Wisconsin. We don't control what goes on in the city of Waukesha. So I appreciate that comment, but I have to discount it. There were some comments made tonight that were kind of struck a play on words here, a chord with me. One of them was that music doesn't pertain to education. And wow, that one really hit me hard, because in Waukesha, music is very, very much a part of our educational system. Matter of fact, music is required by the state as part of our education. So when people say that all Les Paul cared about was his music, that's not true either. Les Paul was an innovator and an inventor, and came up with ideas that nobody else in the world had come up with. And so he wasn't just a musician. He's actually in 2 Hall of Fames, the Inventors Hall of Fame and the Musicians Hall of Fame. So part of the idea that the foundation had was, when they approached us about this, was that Les Paul's name, while a lot of you may remember it differently, Les Paul's name could be used to inspire young people with what he did. and how creative he was. And I know some of you have different memories of Les Paul, but in today's educational environment, young people use very heavily the internet. And I spent about 3 hours this week on the internet watching Les Paul YouTube videos of him and Mary Ford, his inventions, people's comments about his life. And I'm not a student, but these are ways that kids learn today. So they don't have the memories that you have, but they'll be learning in a different way. And if that sort of learning is inspirational, wonderful. There was also a comment made tonight about Les Paul didn't really care about education. Today's teachers are taught to identify different students and how they learn in different ways. I think personally, Les Paul would have been the type of person, and this is just my speculation, and I'm not a professional educator, but he probably would have been identified for a gifted and talented program in the Waukesha School District. But unfortunately, we didn't identify students that way back then. Gifted and talented kids don't necessarily fit in with other kids. They have their own way of thinking. They have, some gifts and abilities that are different than your normal classroom setting type of child. And quite heavily, I think his was obviously in being a very, very, very creative person. And if that's inspirational to other kids, I'm not going to put him down for it. To me, that's a big plus. I would think that teachers in the Waukesha School District could identify with that. Here's a kid who just didn't fit in a traditional classroom setting, but yet he would go down Blue Mountain Road to the radio station on Blue Mountain Road where the big antenna used to be to listen to the sound engineers, because we didn't have TV back then. Everything was radio. Les Paul would go down there to learn how it was done. So there's just different ways of learning. Not everything is taught in a textbook. And if it's inspirational to the students in the school district, it's only a name on a building. I appreciate all your memories. I'm about educating children. I'm about finding that trigger for every kid so that he can have the tools to get out there, be a productive citizen in our community. Les Paul didn't come back here. If he would have come back here, he would have never been hired by Bing Crosby. He probably never would have invented the solid body guitar. He probably wouldn't have met Mary Ford. He probably wouldn't have invented multi-track recording, which was to me one of the most fascinating things on the YouTube videos that I saw. I was blown away. So there are many, many things that this individual did because he left Waukesha. And in the end, he wanted to be buried here, next to his mother. Some people say he didn't like his mother, get along with his mother. In the very end, that's where his final resting place is. So if it's an inspiration to kids, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Ms. Madden?
As I said last month, there are as many people that want this that aren't here as don't want this. So we're not gonna make everybody in Waukesha happy. And
Is your mic? Okay. And
as I said last month, is that better?
Yes.
Thanks. There's gonna be as many people that are unhappy with us as are happy with us. The people that are happy, don't care about the change or want the change are not here tonight. The people that don't want the change are definitely here. But we represent everybody in our school district. So we have to look at the whole big picture. And I appreciate everybody coming. I do have a couple comments because we have one of our schools that incorporates music into everything they learn and how they learn it. So for music to not be an education is just a horrible, wrong statement. And Les Paul did say that the teachers at Waukesha, when he was going there, are the ones that inspired him to be creative, to learn on his own. And that was a very hard thing to do, especially with no money that he had. But he went out and managed to do that and managed to become world famous. And if we name the school after him, there is absolutely no harm in that. We still have the Lincoln Building. We don't have the Edison Building. They tore that down. And we have the Worthington Building. And as Steve Edlin said, it's a name outside of a building. If it inspires one student, it's worth it. It's a name. It's a good name for Waukesha, and it will put us on the map, no doubt about it. Thank you.
Mr. Como?
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And thank you for everyone for your comments tonight, your emails, letters. Pat, I also did receive a number of favorable comments. And you're right, those people haven't shown up tonight, but they're out there. And there's a number of people out there who want to see this, who want to see this happen. So where do we go from here? Really, there's two names that the Les Paul Foundation came back that said that they were acceptable. Les Paul Middle School, which is what we had proposed last month, and then Les Paul Middle School during our conversation last month at our full board meeting, Central Campus. Following that came up as a possibility. And we had another possibility, but the foundation didn't want to have Les Paul Central Middle School. That just seemed to be, I think, too garbled. But as far as the foundation is concerned, it's Les Paul Middle School or Les Paul Middle School Central Campus. So that's really what I think we need to be talking about tonight, considering those two names. The first, I'm trying to think through this myself, and really the first question that I ask myself is Les Paul worthy of having a school named after him? And when I look at his accomplishments, and he's known worldwide, I have to say yes to that. He's done a lot in his life. We've all been influenced by Les in our lives, unless you haven't listened to any recordings. So he's touched all of our lives and have made our lives better to a certain degree. So is this caliber of person worthy of having a school named after him? I believe yes. So why would we consider Les, and why would we consider naming a school after Les Paul right now? And I know we have spent a lot of time focused on what should our students be learning right now. What's important about preparing our students for their careers, and what are the jobs that are going to be available for them? Most of the jobs that are going to be available for the kids going through the school right now, at least half of them don't exist right now. Why? Because our world changes very quickly, extremely quickly. I own a web development business. The internet started back a long time ago, prior to business getting involved with it. Government and higher education had started the internet. And businesses really didn't come along till many years later and started using it. So I didn't even, when I was in high school, I could not even conceive of me owning a business in web development because it didn't exist. So what are some of the things that we need to help teach our children how to do well? Well, we call those 21st century skills. And those 21st century skills include a number of the characteristics that I think describe Les Paul. Creativity. We need our students to be able to look at a problem and creatively to analyze it and to creatively come up with solutions that don't exist. The answers to all of our problems simply don't exist in a book or just have it readily prepared to present it to people. So creative people come up with solutions to problems. And creativity is one of the most important things that we're teaching our children these days. We've changed how we teach to incorporate more activities to allow our students to be creative. And what comes closely with that is innovation, being able to think out of the box, being able to come up with, again, the solutions to these problems that just don't exist. So you have to create and innovate those solutions. Now, to me, if I was to summarize some of the things that Les had accomplished, if I was to choose a few words that kind of summarize who he is, he, to me, is a lifelong learner. And what are we all about here? And what is education all about? We hope to plant the seeds in our students today to be lifelong learners, to not just after I get my diploma, okay, that's it, or after I go to college and get my degree, that's it. We want and we have to be lifelong learners to be successful in today's world. So when I look at Les and his life, I believe he is inspirational, and I believe it really is coming at a good time to consider naming a school after him because of where we are with developing those 21st century skills and trying to come up with the best way to educate our students so that they will be lifelong learners.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Well, this is a great discussion about Les Paul and what he's accomplished. Yeah, he's a genius. He was an innovator. He did a lot of great things. In my mind, though, I don't think that naming a school after him is necessarily the best way to honor someone like Les Paul and the accomplishments that he has made. So I will not be voting to rename the school Les Paul, strictly because I have talked to many a person in this community, listen to everybody, because I never make a decision until I hear from the constituency, and I tend to agree that Les Paul, while a great man, did a lot of great things in his life, naming a school after him is definitely not the best way to honor him in this community. Thank you.
Mr. Edlin?
Superintendent Gray, are we going to change any of the signage on that building that would change it from the Worthington building?
No, no.
So that
The
would
only possible that I'm aware of would be, out front to where it might be central. And I don't know how much of that either, but
Okay,
none of the old, the historic signs would be changed.
okay. Ms. Madden, you and Mr. Como might be the one of two people who might be able to answer this question for me. When the building was changed, the buildings, plural, were changed to Central Middle School, did we have opposition from the community about taking away the names of, I guess, Waukesha School would have been changed to Worthington, and then Worthington was taken away to change to Central along with Lincoln?
And
What-
Edison was there also.
Okay,
That
so
building was,
we had a notable in the community who was the principal of the original high school that it was named after, and his name was no longer It's still on the building, but no longer given the current name that it has now, and so was the Lincoln Building after President Lincoln and Edison after Thomas Edison. Did we hear dissent within the community for taking those names, for reassigning the name?
No.
Okay, I find that a curious thing. Mr. Como?
Yeah, and actually, the name Central kind of got lost. There really wasn't, I don't believe, a middle school name when I went there. So high school consisted of 2 years at South, which was your 11th and 12th year. You'd graduate from South. But my freshman and sophomore year was at Central. It wasn't Central Middle School. It wasn't Central High School. It was Central Campus that was part of Waukesha South, I believe, is technically what it was. As students, we referred to it just as Central. So it kind of lost its identity. It was part of high school, technically, but it just became Central as 9th and 10th for part of South High School. So, and I don't know, I don't recall how many years it was like that.
The Lincoln Building was 7th and 8th grade. The Edison Building was 9th grade. And then 10th, 11th, 12th was the Worthington Building.
Okay.
That's how it went.
Okay.
And then South was built, so they start transferring the people from the Worthington Building up there. They had 2 years at it, and then they added another year and the other year.
Okay.
So that's originally how it was for years and years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to affirm, Superintendent Gray, that the Les Paul Foundation has agreed to pay for all costs, if this were to pass the board, associated with the renaming, letterhead, whatever
Whatever costs.
whatever costs, so there'd be no cost to the district at all
No.
if we did this?
No.
Okay. One thought that I had, and you know, to my knowledge, the foundation hasn't approached us about anything else such as scholarships at this point. And I know that a lot of people have commented that there are other ways that Les Paul Foundation could, you know, his name could be spread throughout the district. But I got to tell you, you know, the foundation came to us first and asked us if we would do this and consider it. And if we said no, I don't know how receptive I would be to wanting to offer scholarships to the district. You know, I mean, I think a name on a building is not nearly as controversial, but beneficial, I should say, as would be scholarships to students. So who knows? I mean, you know, the foundation has given scholarships out in different cities throughout the United States in different music and art programs. And I don't know, I'm kind of hopeful that, you know, one hand feeds the other in this deal.
Ms. Madden?
I'll just add that Gibson Guitar has been very generous because of Les Paul to the school.
Yes.
They've given us many, many guitars, and I don't think that's going to end.
And money,
And money.
the money that was raised through the guitars.
Mr. Como?
And to me, I isolate these as two separate issues. Naming the school, to me, should not be tied to, you know, extra funds coming our way, other than, you know, we should take the signage or should have them pay for the signage and letterhead and those kinds of things. So I think those are mutually exclusive decisions. So for me, what's on the table is the naming of the school, really.
Agreed.
And I'm sorry, is it okay?
You still have the floor, Mr. Como.
Thank you, Mr.
No
Brown.
one's taken it away from you yet.
I'm in my own mind, I'm still not sure if I'm leaning towards Les Paul Middle School or Les Paul Middle School Central Campus. And I do see potentially compromising with the Central Campus being in the name. And it still has the purity of having Les Paul Middle School together. But I really couldn't last month, I really could not do Les Paul Central Middle School, so I'm glad that one is taken off the table. So I can say that I do believe we should name the school Les Paul Middle School, but I'm not sure if we should add Central Campus. So I would be interested if there's any comments from my fellow board members on that.
Ms. Madden?
I do have a comment. I think that the central campus would continue with what we did with Saratoga STEM, Randall STEM. They wanted to maintain those,
Hey, do you need to speak in the mic, Ms. Madden?
they wanted to maintain Randall School. So it's the STEM school, Randall campus, Saratoga STEM school, Saratoga campus. So I think that the central campus, because everybody is familiar with that and knows where it is in Waukesha. So I would, and with that, I'll make a motion that we change the name to Les Paul Middle School Central Campus.
I'll
Do I-
second that.
Okay, Ms. Madden makes a motion has moved to change the name to Les Paul Middle School Central Campus, and Mr. Como has second. And from that, we'll continue the discussion. Any further discussion among board members at this point in time, committee members and board members? Mr. Como?
Obviously, I seconded that, Pat, because I think your comment made sense with respect to keeping that heritage. People know the name of Central Campus. We do have other schools that have set precedents in that manner. And there are a fair number of people who really want to keep Central in the name. So I think that balances out both perspectives to a certain degree. Maybe a little bit more towards the less people who like the name Les Paul, but it at least allows us to keep that heritage in the name.
Mr. Edlin?
I'd just like to offer one final observation, that I've noticed a lot of comments about this process where people said, if you're going to do this, you should change it to this name. That's not how the process works. The process works by somebody making a proposal to the administration, and from there we follow the policy as the policy is set up. So we can't just take this up as a committee and pass it on as a recommendation to a board. It's a very long process. This has been ongoing for Superintendent Gray about 2 years or year and a
Well,
half?
the request was just made this earlier, I should say late fall, early winter,
Okay,
and we convened our committees throughout the winter and spring.
okay. So it's not just a decision just by us. These are recommendations that have come forward after a process was followed. So any of you have a right to do the same process that the Les Paul Foundation did. We just follow the process through our policy manual that we have that gives us guidelines on how we go about doing this. Okay, so that's not going to exclude anybody from ever wanting to change the name on a building if they feel it's appropriate, and you have enough people who are behind it and you follow the procedures. That's the way it works.
Okay, I'll weigh in with a few comments at this point. I'm very pleased people came to talk tonight. I was concerned that people wouldn't come to talk tonight about the issue. In fact, I wanted to make sure that this was posted appropriately so that even people that had spoken before could speak again to the issue. You know, I still have a difficult time with this issue. And there's a lot of reasons why I have a difficult time with it. One of them that came to my mind first is this something Les Paul would want in terms of some of the angst. And I'm sure he wouldn't want the angst that has come across tonight, and I think Ms. Baker made that point. So in that regard, I don't think we're really honoring his memory very well with the angst that's come across. And that would be a point that would bother me a little bit. The other part is, you know, we're talking about members of our community who have been here for many, many years and deeply vested in the community. in the culture I come from, we use the term elders, and you respect what they have to say, their concerns, their emotions. Their emotions are as important as anything, and the wisdom that they bring and offer to the community. And doesn't mean you always agree with them, but you certainly respect it and honor it. And no matter what decision we make tonight, your opinion is respected and honored and appreciated. And the wisdom you give to us as citizens and members of the community for many, many years. So both of those things are things that I really weigh heavily when I'm trying to think about what the right decision is to do. How Les Paul would feel about it, and how our elder citizens and community members feel about it. I do think that, there's people on the other side of the issue too, as Ms. Madden pointed to, that aren't here tonight, that, they're not going to advocate strongly for Les Paul, in terms of they may not know, have the personal connection or the personal understanding of his past, and they may not really have paid much attention to his accomplishments. I only know of one other time when we talked about the potential of maybe naming a school in this district regarding naming it after somebody, and that was when there was money being offered to name a school someplace in Waukesha County after Reagan. And I remember at the time we said that, it takes more than just money and some big name who had no connection to this community and the money for us to consider naming a school. And if we had considered naming a school at Reagan, there would have been opponents to that, I'm sure, just because of the political sense of it. And but we really never gave it serious thought because it wasn't about the money, it was about what was appropriate. And I'm sure a lot of people here tonight are talking about what's appropriate for a school name. Both my children went to Central Middle School and did very well there. I never understood why it was named Central Middle School. I didn't know about the Worthington building. I didn't know about Edison and Lincoln and the campuses as such and the buildings and all that. But, and I didn't even know at the time that it used to be Waukesha High, which I think is a shame. I think really we should have something, a monument or someplace out there that says this was Waukesha High. Okay, that's what we really should have. That this is where a large portion of what Waukesha is today was created as the sole Waukesha High. I think the fact that it went from Waukesha High to Central Middle School, it discards that deep history of it being Waukesha High. I don't think Central Middle School actually reflects that. When I look at Les Paul, he's a man, like any of us, that I'm sure wasn't perfect, had his flaws. I only know of one perfect man in the history of mankind. And so I really have a very hard time with saying, whatever flaws are perceived or were real or whatever is really a big factor here. As far as we know, he was an outstanding member, respected by a ton of people. Very gifted person, and I know from people who have met him, were just thrilled with what they encountered. And he had his rough moments, I guess, his time too, just like everybody else, but for the most part, they were thrilled with their opportunity to meet Les Paul, which I never had. Comment about whether he was an educator or not. I think Les Paul was an educator. I think he educated a lot of people. When I remember people telling me about a meeting with a young man who's learning to play the guitar for the first time, and how he inspired this young man to do his first, and then send Les Paul the tape to see how he did. Steve Miller will definitely tell you Les Paul inspired him and was an educator for him. All the things Mr. Edlin said, Mr. Edlin researched the topic as I did on the internet, and because I could hear all those things, and I don't need to repeat them all because he covered them very eloquently about Les Paul. I would say today, another thing about Les Paul is if Les Paul was a student in the school district of Waukesha today, or had been in the last 10 years, he would have gotten his high school diploma. And I say that because there's many options for a young man like Les Paul to develop his career and his opportunities and still get his high school diploma. We have people who travel all the time that attend RE Achieve school, and I believe that Les Paul would have taken advantage of that. And also the options that we have available today to students to finish their high school diploma when they're not a conventional student and get their high school degree is second to none in the state of in the state of Wisconsin. My grandfather made sure all his children, all 10 of them, even though they were poor, finished high school, and my other grandfather had to teach himself to read. And I still think they were phenomenal people, even though they themselves never finished high school. And if you ever watch someone who taught themselves to read when they're, and watch them struggle through a book, but proud of the fact they can read and they taught themselves, it's really a phenomenal thing. I travel a lot, and when I travel, I can bring up anything about Waukesha, and it's a tough thing to bring up Waukesha and have someone relate to a name. The Bodines. Who's the Bodines? I mean, that's the way people, you'd have to play the music, and then they faintly remember the music of the Bodines. And that doesn't mean the Bodines weren't tremendously talented and special people that came from the community, but when it comes to worldwide recognition in today's day and age, you're not going to see that. I try to think of who else from Waukesha that would bring the attention and the recollection. I've never had a problem mentioning Les Paul's name. South Africa, Australia, Europe, they all know who Les Paul is. He is a world-renowned person and figure that is really unmatched as far as I know. And if there's someone else that I could bring names up to recognize Waukesha that people would recognize, I'm certainly open to suggestions. Doesn't mean we should name a school after him, but it does explain that he was really a phenomenally worldwide recognized figure. And then I look at his accomplishments, his technological accomplishments. It's not just the music, you know, the fact he can play a guitar and he developed a certain style. Multi-track recording is something that I've marveled at since the first time I heard it. And his ability to capture that and do that, and I saw something just, my wife actually recorded it for me on well, now it's Jimmy Fallon, it was Jay Leno at the Tonight Show, where he had Billy Joel on, and they pulled out an iPad, and they have an iPad app called a looper, which is just Les Paul on the iPad. You record, you push a button, you record, and they did a, just between the two of them, they sang 6 different voices overlaid to each other, just like Les Paul did with his guitar and with Mary Ford. And Mary Ford was the first one to do something like that. They recorded her voice, I think, in 2 or 3 or 4 different. So when I look at everything about Les Paul, on the plus side, I see a person that I'm glad someone asked that the name was offered for us to put on a school that didn't currently have a name on the school. It didn't have a person's name. It has buildings, but it didn't have a person's name. Because we aren't taking a school and renaming Horning or Randall or, you know, taking someone's name off and putting his on. I'm sure he'd be opposed to something like that too. And I would be as well. So I'm going to support this tonight. And I can't say for sure what I'll be doing at the full board meeting, but tonight I do feel it's the right thing to do. That doesn't mean I feel any differently about what I heard tonight from so many of you. And I do respect that. I do think your point of view is very important. But I just can't see turning down, and it has nothing to do with money, it's not about money. Turning down, as Mr. Edlin said, someone that we can put out as an example to our children what they can accomplish as lifelong learners and lifelong achievers, and who they can be right here from Waukesha. And you know, the middle school environment, I think one of the seniors said it tonight, you know, it's a very important time when you're trying to develop yourself as an individual, frame what your future can be. I think most of our challenges with kids, they start in middle school, and we see the impact as they get into high school. So we need these types of images and examples, and as Mr. Edlin said, you get on the internet and you can see all sorts of positive examples of Les Paul and his accomplishments. And it's just something that I think will help us with our children. But only as much as we make of it. It's not the name on a school that really matters. It's what we do as individuals and with parents, with our kids mainly. Any other comments on the topic? Mr. Como?
After the last F&F meeting held on a Monday night, Tuesday, I was in a Starbucks, and lo and behold, the person I ran into was former Mayor Carol Lombardi. And she continued to push her point of view, and as so many of you have talked tonight. And I've known Carol, Mrs. Lombardi, for a long time. I grew up with her children. And I have a great amount of respect for her and the work that she did as mayor. And she said, Joe, I think this is just one of those things where, as an elected school board official or any elected official, some issues you just can never satisfy everybody. And the best thing to do is to agree to disagree respectfully. And I think that's one of the situations that we have before us. So, but you can imagine the advocating that Carol was doing in the Starbucks that day. So, and I love her dearly, and I respect her tremendously.
And before we move forward on this, I'd like everyone to know that, you know, we're not the final deciders. There's a full board meeting in 2 days where the decision will be addressed again. And maybe a final decision will be made that night. Maybe it'll be pushed back to us for us to reconsider, or maybe it'll be put off in a different direction. But so you will have an opportunity to speak to this again. This will not be the only time you have an opportunity to speak. We don't allow audience back and forth with board members, otherwise it can get kind of disruptive and things like that. And if you're wondering why we're not asking you to speak again, it's just not the way the system works. But you will have another chance to speak before the board at the full board meeting if you wish to. Any other comments for board members? From the administration, any comments at all at this point in time? If not, we'll go ahead and take the vote. No comments from administration. Let's call the roll.
Joseph Como,
Aye.
Steve Edlin,
Aye.
Patrick McCaffrey,
No.
Patricia Madden,
Aye.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. Motion passes 4-1. Okay, we'll move on to our second action item for tonight. Thank everybody for coming tonight and commenting, and you're certainly welcome to comment at the full board meeting on Wednesday night as well. So the second item tonight is approval of resolution authorizing and approving an equipment schedule into master lease purchase agreement with Apple Inc. Ms. Clifton?
This is our fourth wave, if you will. The first lease was issued early 2013. We have been on a semester basis since then, so we are now up to number 4. And the plan is we would have one more after this, and that would finalize our implementation of Waukesha 1.
It's true.
So if you have any questions on it, the details of what this purchase covers is included in the packet.
Mr. Como?
I'm assuming it basically mimics everything we've done in the past. There hasn't been any language change. I notice it's the $1 purchase at the end of the lease.
This is, I'm sorry, my allergies are kicking in, so it could be interesting by the end of the night. This is just an addendum, and it all goes back to the original master lease of June of 2012, which actually precedes Waukesha 1. If you recall, that was our initial lease with West High School.
Yeah.
But these are all supplemental schedules to that original master lease.
Okay, so the addendum follows exactly the pattern of the other addendums. Probably would have been a better way for me to ask the question. Because you're right, because the
3 year-
contract does go back further.
Yeah, it even
So
precedes.
I actually meant to just ask about the addendum, and what a fantastic interest rate of 0.9%. I wish I personally could get that interest rate, so.
Mr. Adlin?
This question is probably for one of our technology guys. Do we have the bandwidth to support these additional devices?
Yeah. Yep.
I got an email today that said we were maxed out.
Well, the email didn't say we were maxed out, first of all.
Did it say?
We were experiencing high
Let
volumes.
me pull it up.
Okay.
It said that we were experiencing high volumes and we had a slow response rate on Google and Blackboard. That doesn't mean maxed out.
And keep reading.
Maxed out,
It said
do
something
you want
about
me
the
to
pipe, the
keep?
pipe is full.
Oh, this notice is not due to network failure, but is strictly based on the using of our available internet pipe. Right.
We had a fair amount of video and audio going on in the classrooms. That is not the norm.
I guess that's kind of to my point, is that now we're going to add another 5,800 devices?
Yeah, we have plenty of bandwidth that we haven't even used yet. We haven't even lit up all our bandwidth.
Right.
Goes to the LAN network that we have running with the city and whatnot. We can increase our bandwidth when needed.
Just to answer that question, Mr. Edlin, because I remember back when it was done, it was a huge,
Yes.
forward-looking, actually, it was Mr. Danielson that drove this large bandwidth that was like, AT&T wanted to offer us like 1/10 or 1/20th of what we had, what we have today.
Yes.
And we said, look, we can do our own system. We did it with the city and have way more, looking at the long-term needs of the district. So we could run out. I'm sure that's quite possible, but the reason why we have is because of the history of what happened, so. But it's a good question, yeah.
We did do, if you recall, we did a Cisco lease,
Yep.
August of 2012, and that was to target infrastructure in our buildings, to increase the capabilities of running wireless in all of our facilities.
Okay.
Any other questions regarding the approval of resolution? Mr. Como?
I move to approve the resolution authorizing and approving an equipment schedule to the master lease purchase agreement with Apple as presented.
We have a motion from Mr. Como. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. McCaffrey, excuse me. Further discussion amongst the committee members? Okay, I see no further discussion. We will go ahead and take a roll call on this.
Steve Edlin,
Aye.
Madden,
Aye.
Aye.
Patrick McCaffrey,
Aye.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Our next action item for tonight is approval of 2013-14 budget transfers and adjustments.
This is the second one of the year that we do. You typically see the first round in January, where we try to reconcile our existing budget with changes that have occurred and any new grants that have been awarded to the district. So this is our final cleanup, all routine in nature. If you have any specific questions on any of those, I would turn that over to Joe. Joe Sikora.
Had to have the right Joe here.
I said that.
Any
You-
specific
yeah.
questions for Joe amongst the board members?
You don't
And
wanna-
we can ask Joe, but he wouldn't really know.
Details, yep.
Yeah.
Those are the
Mr.
wrong
Como.
details.
Any questions for Mr. Sikora? Okay, do I have a motion then to approve the budget transfers and amendments?
I move to approve the 2013-14 budget transfers and amendments as presented.
We have a motion from Mr. McCaffrey. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Madden. Any further discussion amongst the committee members? With that, then we'll proceed with the roll call vote. Cindy?
Patricia Madden,
Aye.
Patrick McCaffrey,
Aye.
Steve Edelman,
Aye.
Joseph Como,
Aye.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. See, things can move along quite smoothly. Now we'll move to item number 4, approval of health insurance plan design changes. Comments from the administration? We're going to take a slight pause. There.
It might get worse as we go here. The proposal for the plan design changes is twofold. It starts addressing concerns we have as we go down the road with the Cadillac tax and trying to control our costs within our plan. So it is doing some cost shifting. The proposal is to increase office visits from our current $10 copay to $25 if it's a primary care physician and $50 if it's a specialist. Effective July of 2014, those office visit costs are starting to be applied to our out-of-pocket maximums. They have not been in the past. So, if you will, we've got a deductible bucket, you've got your out-of-pocket maxes, and then copays. The copays in the past have gone on, didn't apply to any of those other two buckets. Just so, no matter how many you had, they never applied to your deductible or your out-of-pocket max. The Affordable Care Act has changed that, so effective July 1, they will start applying to our out-of-pocket max. July of 2015, our prescriptions also then start applying to that. So a year from now, we will be revisiting what that out-of-pocket max ought to look like, because in essence, people will hit it much more quickly, and then it puts more cost back on the plan. So we consider this a step in redefining our plan. Mr. Edlin had asked for a worksheet detailing the costs that our consultants had used, and there isn't a worksheet. We do not have that detail. We do not quite have a full year of history under our self-insured plan. We were fully insured under United Healthcare prior to that, and we switched consultants in a month ago. So they're still transitioning, trying to gather data. So they went back to United Healthcare, did a proposal, asked them to cost it out, but we didn't give them multiple options. We only asked for what is the impact of this proposed change. And it's a 3.5% reduction in our premium, is what they anticipate this would generate.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a couple of things that, the reasons that I asked for that. The insurance plan that I am part of does not do referrals. So if you go to your primary care physician, they do not work on a referral system because you're essentially making 2 office visits out of 1. If you need to see a hand doctor, you go right to the hand doctor, otherwise you've double billed. You don't need to go to your primary care physician for certain things that he's not a specialist in that area. So I'm not really in support of the 2-fee structure. If you should want or need to go see a specialist, I see no difference between that and your primary care office visit. There's a difference in the cost of the office visit to our plan, because the specialist is going to be higher. But if you go see your primary care physician first, and then you have to go see the specialist, it ends up being quite a bit more than if you would have went to see the specialist to begin with. So I wouldn't want to discourage somebody from going to see a specialist first. If you feel it's, of that importance to you that you want to go see a specialist first, by all means you should.
That was one of the conversations we had with our consultants, because one thing we do not want to do is cause people not to go to the doctor. We still want the early diagnosis and early treatments. And we were assured that at a $50 rate, it was not a negative impact to the plan. They looked at their private sector carriers, and it's a common mix. The two-tier and the $25, $50 rate is a common structure among the private sector. At least that's what they were telling us. And so we were relying on their expertise.
I understand that perspective, but, you know, our employees are consumers too. And if they only have to pay $25 versus $50, they're going to go to the primary care physician first. And if the primary care physician says, I have to refer you to a specialist, then you know, they're going to pay again. And we've also, you know, bit the bullet twice. So I would have rather have seen this structured more like $40 no matter who you go to, whether it's your primary care or your specialist, and let somebody make the choice. This way we're kind of, and even beyond just the primary care physician, with the clinic starting up, people are going to want to go to the clinic first rather than to their primary care physician anyway. So I don't know, I kind of think we're doubling up on our costs in the long run. In not in all instances, in some instances. But I would prefer to see the rate more the same than I would two-tier and, you know, twice the cost.
Mr. Como?
I know I've made the mistake of going to a specialist thinking I have something wrong with a particular thing, and I was wrong. I guess I shouldn't play doctor as the lesson I learned there, and I am a lifelong learner, so. But I'm trying to take a look at this, Lori, from a more of a 30,000-foot point of view. Three, almost 4 years ago now, we were looking at changing our health carriers. We did that. We made a number of changes to our health care plan at that time. Also, over the next couple of years, we've now set ourselves up and have executed the self-insurance, which was a big step for us. That looks like that is going to be successful. We're coming towards the end of our first year, and it looks like we're going to have enough in our reserve fund, correct?
We're having a favorable year.
Okay, so, and that's what's driving potentially some of these plan changes too, is how much, and what do those premiums look like. So, as we look at that, and as we look down the road, so as we look at where we've been and where we're going, really one of the things that we've been striving for here are options to present to our employees. And we don't really have options right now. It's just one plan.
Correct. Now, we are working towards a high deductible plan. That is our target, to introduce a second plan a year from now.
Okay.
One of the obstacles we have to overcome is that we have some people, some of our staff are on a calendar year plan, and some are on a fiscal year plan. So in order to introduce a new plan, we have to get them all in the same year, so that their deductibles line up. With a high deductible plan, you cannot have a flexible, a cafeteria plan, a Section 125 plan, which is on a which is on a fiscal year.
Fiscal year, okay.
So we have all these ducks we have to get in a row, if you will. And so it's coming, the two-tier, or the two-plan options.
Okay.
Under a high deductible plan, there are no office visit co-pays. The first dollar is out of pocket from for the individual. So we're working towards, again, giving people options, but trying to make them a little more comparable and educate people as we go.
And one of the other goals that we have is to, hopefully in 2018, to avoid the Cadillac tax is one of our other goals.
Definitely.
And this is helping us to move towards that?
Anytime we can promote consumerism, it's going to help on our bottom line. We're giving people choices, but we're also giving them reason to think. do I need a primary care physician or do I need the specialist? Do I have the clinic? The clinic is, you know, a no out-of-pocket cost, or the $25 primary, or a $50 specialist. We want people to make educated decisions.
Okay,
And
so
I
this
think
is helping
all-
us move
all
in
is
that
going towards that
direction.
goal because it will help in our cost, ultimately, the bottom line.
Okay, and as we work more closely with Beneco, who is our new consultant, we should see that longer-range plan as the charge was put forth by Mr. O'Brien and this committee last month. How is the progress coming on that longer-range plan?
As I mentioned, we're looking at how we phase these, the structure in, and a high deductible plan is where we see that will help us prevent the district from hitting that Cadillac tax.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to Mr. McCaffrey first. He hasn't spoken to the issue, and he speaks so seldom. We got to put him on the
I know.
stage.
That's appreciated by most. Is this recommendation, did this come from Willis, or did this come from us, or who did this come from?
This is administrative recommendation.
Administrator.
Working with Beneco.
Okay. We don't have any sort of, because I understand what Mr. Edlund is saying, but a lot of times, you go to the primary care physician and they catch you before you go to the specialist. So, you know, they can work both ways. Because the specialist, like you said, is more expensive. So a lot of times, the primary care physician can actually accomplish what the patient needs medically, instead of, you know, going to the specialist. But there, we don't have any sort of data about related to that, and we wouldn't, would we?
Based on the coding, I was able to get some information
Okay.
from UHC today, and it looks about like 2/3 of our office visits are primary care,
Okay.
and only 1/3 go to the specialist. But that's about as far detailed as we could get.
So vast majority of stuff is being handled by a primary care physician.
That's what it looked like in their claims processing. They were able to pull the data.
Yeah, and that's what I had figured, because the primary care physicians can handle most medical issues before seeing the specialist. Thank you.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you. Again, we're gonna have a primary care physician at the clinic. So as a consumer, I would think that getting it for free is gonna be a lot better than paying $25 for it. So, and obviously it's gonna cost less to the plan if people go to the clinic, because it's $40 a visit. So I'll go back to my opposition to the clinic thing. I think that we're gonna be overwhelmed. I think the clinic is gonna have logistics nightmares, but that's my perspective. As you all know, the HR committee had something that's in this on the background section on the agenda pertaining to the tax that is going to be charged to the district. I, as a matter of principle, am deeply opposed to paying taxes on employee benefits. The tax that is going to be taxed by the federal government, which is not a fee, Beneco informed us that the actual form that is filled out is a tax form, a federal tax form. And the money that's being collected for this $63 for the transitional reinsurance fee is not per plan participant, but for every benefit member within the plan. So roughly 3,800 people, not just our 1,500 employees, but all their dependents, are also going to be taxed on an individual basis to pay the $63, which, because of Affordable Care Act, is going to be used to write a check to the health insurance companies, corporations. So we're collecting a tax to underwrite corporations, publicly held corporations. I am so deeply opposed to that. We pay taxes to run government, not to run the private sector. And that's exactly what this is for. If we hit the $27,000 Cadillac tax in 2018, if I'm on the board then, I will vote no against that tax if we hit it too. Because I believe that every employee, whether it is in the private or the public sector, when you get benefits, it's a benefit. And I believe that if there's a tax levied by government on your benefits, you should be responsible for that tax. I'm afraid that with the Affordable Care Act, what we're going to see in hiring practices in both public and private sector is we're going to see preferential treatment given to potential candidates for a job based on the number of dependents that you have. Because the number of dependents that you have are going to impact your health care policy. There's nothing discriminatory about that.
It's not a question we ask now. We don't ask marital status at all.
No, I didn't say marital status. I said number of dependents.
Don't ask that.
Well, we
So
don't-
anyway,
we-
that's-
We do not
that's-
ask that.
That's beyond. The recommendation before HR, there was a motion made to have employees pay taxes on all benefits, and the motion was not seconded. So therefore, administration is calling the shots on benefits. And I personally feel like HR committee had a responsibility to make that decision before coming forward with this recommendation to this committee. That was actually an HR issue, but we have no recommendation.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Just a quick clarification, are you against the employee paying the taxes, or the taxes, or the district paying the taxes?
No, the motion was made for the employees to pay taxes on benefits.
Okay, so you're against that?
No, the motion was made for employees to pay federal taxes on benefits.
Okay,
That's what I supported.
that's what you supported, is that the.
Correct, that was the
The
motion.
burden falls on the employee?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to make sure that I understood exactly where
Mhm.
where you're headed. Okay.
Yep.
Ms. Madden?
Well, we did discuss this in HR, and we did not second Mr. Edlund's motion. And I feel that when we bid out the insurance to the companies, they included this tax, fee, whatever, in the sum that they gave us for insurance for the employees. So they're already paying this tax. It's hidden, it's part of their premium, but they're paying it. So we want to tax them twice? That's not fair. And that's what we would be doing. It's a 3-year tax. Nobody likes it, but that's the law we have in this nation. We have no choice but to pay that. But I do not believe it's a fair tax to add on to individuals. If you have a family with husband and wife and 3 or 4 children, and they have to pay $63 a person plus the $2, there's another $2 in there. That's a lot of money plus their premium every month that they can't afford. They really can't afford it.
So, we can continue this discussion, and we will continue the discussion, but what I would like to do is, if there's a motion for approval, and then if there's a motion after that to amend it, do we have an motion to approve the health insurance plan design changes as presented? Is there a motion from anyone for approval of that? And then we can continue the discussion.
Sure, I'd be glad to make that motion.
Ms. Madden moves to approve the health insurance plan design changes. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
So we can continue the discussion at least. Mr. Como has seconded that. Now, we can proceed on with the discussion. I just wanted to get that on the table so we could frame it correctly, and then if there's any amendments to be offered to that, then so be it. Any additional discussion? I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought it'd be better to do it that way. Mr. Como?
Yeah, Steve, first, when we started talking about this, I'm looking at this as being a semantics thing, tax versus fee. But I do agree with our federal government that it has been ruled as a tax. I believe it is a tax. So I agree with that. As you guys know, I own my own company, and this has been something that has been not so fun to deal with my own individual business. I have a tenant also in the building where my business is located who is a health insurance agent. So I've gotten to have a lot of, let's say, extra free expertise on this. And I actually had asked this individual who's been in business a number of years and really understands ACA probably as best as anyone that I know. And I still don't think anyone really knows ACA. All, was it about 20,000 pages now of regulations? I mean, it's huge. I asked him, what are private businesses doing on this particular thing? And are they pulling out this tax and asking their employees to pay it separately? And really, there's been a lot of business owners who've wanted to do that, but haven't really taken the step to do that. There hasn't really been precedence to separate fees and taxes out in the past, and I think it's just kind of looking at what have we done in the past. Also, I believe Beneco pretty much had said the same thing, and they're our consultant right now, so at least there's been two what I would consider valid experts in this field that haven't really recommended that we should separate that out. Lori, did we ever get an opinion too from our attorneys on that?
We actually have a call set up for tomorrow morning, so I wasn't
So we
able to-
haven't received an opinion on that
No.
yet?
We did have a conversation with Beneco today, and they questioned if it would pass the non-discrimination regulations if we identified individual taxes for individual parties. Their thought was more along the line that we would have to break it down by individual plan. So if our plan is you either have single or family. So there would be a cost if you had the family plan, or a single plan, and there would be another cost if you had a family. They didn't think we would be able to actually identify it to the number of belly buttons in that individual's plan, but it would be a blended rate. But like I said, we have that conference call scheduled for tomorrow morning.
Have we spoken with any other school district that has taken this matter up, or any other other local governmental
There aren't
entities or
any-
state?
There aren't any bodies that we were able to identify that are passing the tax or fee on to the individual level.
Okay.
They're keeping it at the plan level.
Okay, so at this time, it seems like there's discussion, but nobody's been moving forward with that.
There's definitely companies and governmental bodies who are frustrated with the tax and would like to find some way another way to pay it, but we have nobody taking official action.
I can tell you, I'm beyond frustration, and not just with this tax. I know there isn't a direct correlation here, but for my business, over the last 5 years, our premiums went up 100%, so that's an average of 20% a year. And this year, with the ACA, I just got those numbers, and it's a 51% increase in premium. And that's just astounding to me. So there's a lot that's going to shake out in the next couple of years. But right now, given at least the people that I've turned to, I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable breaking that out, Steve. But I understand your concept there and why you're having us look at this.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you. A couple of things. I don't agree with you, Pat, about this being an additional cost to the employee, because the employees are already receiving family plan is $20,000 a year. I mean, that's almost 50% of the salary of a starting teacher. Okay, that is huge. The $65 tax is for 3 years, per year. It's per belly button, so I don't see how it could be discriminatory because there's nothing discriminatory about it. It's by head count. Okay, so my question comes in, is the only tax that I know of that the federal government actually charges a tax on everybody and requires an employer to pay it is Social Security. This tax, I don't believe, I didn't hear anything from Beneco or anybody else that the Affordable Care Act says employers have to pay this tax, unlike Social Security. And this is a tax on a benefit. So what we're going to do tonight is we're setting a precedent, if this passes, saying that any taxes that government wants to create, we're going to pick up. Now, from a taxpayer's perspective, you've got a tax on a tax, and that's where I'm questioning whether this is even legal. I don't know. I have no clue. But it's double taxation. You know, we don't do this with a sales tax. It's, you know, you get a reseller's permit, and the tax is passed on to the final user. And that's my thought, is that this should be passed on to the final user. And it's not a forever tax, it's a 3-year tax. But to me, it shows goodwill, goodwill to the community, and I don't know how many other districts or how many other governmental units are using this misleading term of fee, and so that the governmental bodies who are making these decisions are actually picking up that this is a tax. Because the only people, where this is coming from in fees is the same people who originated the Affordable Care Act. The guy from Beneco told us, you know, they're calling it a fee, even though the federal tax form, the form that's filled out, is a federal tax form. And the Supreme Court has decided that the Affordable Care Act is a tax. So we know it's a tax, and there's nothing hiding about it. It's equally offensive that the federal government would charge everybody a tax to pay a corporation. It's supposed to be the other way around. Corporations are supposed to pay taxes. At least that's what I hear from, you know, one political side of the spectrum, is that corporations don't pay enough taxes. And here we are doing just the opposite. We're going to collect a tax from everybody to pay corporations. That's backwards. And when you do double taxation on everybody, from your city, your county, your state, your school district, to pay the federal government, that's wrong, in my opinion.
Can I just
Ms. Clifton, would you like to comment?
Patient. The statutes call it a fee, and so that's where the term fee comes from. We are being assessed a fee, and the fee is being assessed to the plan, not the individuals. So regardless of who ultimately pays it, it's the district that has to cut that check. It has to come from School District of Waukesha's plan. If we choose to pull it out of employees' paychecks or however that might be, it still has to be the district cutting the check.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll just briefly comment. You know, one thing I believe all board members should do is they should be very vigilant in what comes before them, and I think we do a good job of that, and we've done a very good job of that tonight. I have a hard time differentiating between a fee and a tax. I think anything the government charges you is a tax, whether they call it a fee or not. I mean, and the legislation says fee. The reason it says fee is because the politicians didn't want to say they were raising taxes. I mean, that's why it says fee. According to 4 Supreme Court justices, it's not a tax. According to 5 of them, or according to one of them who was a swing vote, it is a tax, and therefore, you know, not necessarily this one. Actually, is talking about something else, but the enforcement mechanism in the Affordable Care Act he called as a tax. He didn't really rule on this particular reinsurance fee, but I think his ruling also said that if you're using a tax form and you're using the IRS to collect a fee, he thinks you should call it a tax. But, you know, the administration, whether they call it a fee or a tax, I think the legislation that says fee, unless you have a clear change in the legislation and the Supreme Court specifically speaks to it, you're okay of calling it a fee. If you want to think of it as a tax, I think that's a reasonable conclusion as well. You can conclude it's a tax. I conclude almost all fees are taxes in my mind. The one problem I have with the proposal that Mr. Edlin has presented apparently at HR and also discussed tonight was if we try to collect that tax, I'm going to use tax just so we don't have an argument over that phrase, whether it's a fee or a tax, because I think we can all agree that fees are taxes, or at least it is a tax in some way. If we try to collect that tax per person, per belly button per se, I do think that that would be in that detail, discriminatory. I have been involved in insurance plans where they do break it out by the number of, category. If you have more than 4 dependents, you're going to have a higher this and that. But they don't actually go to the specifics of asking you how many dependents you have and charging you per dependent. And it's all about plan management. It's a pool, right? It's a pool of people. And when you manage a pool, to manage it efficiently, you manage the cost as a pool and you allocate the cost as a pool. If you start going down individual by individual, it becomes a management nightmare, especially for when we're self-insured and self-funded. But if we weren't, then we'd be paying higher fees for someone to manage something where we're trying to individually count to such depth. The total dollars are going to get paid one way or another, and they're going to get paid by the employees one way or another because we have revenue limits. So either we're going to take more money from their pockets in terms of higher insurance rates, or we're going to not pay them as much in salary because we have revenue limits. We just can't increase revenue to absorb extra fees or taxes that are mandated to us. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like everything else. I don't know any American who doesn't protest taxes. I mean, we all protest them, and it's an American trait. And nobody likes taxes, nobody supports taxes unless it's for something that they believe in. And at the same time, the government tells us one thing that's certain is death and taxes. And we're not talking about death here, we're talking about taxes, and they are certain. So whether it's a tax or a fee, we just can't avoid it, how we collect it, how we pay it. I think we should seek the most efficient method possible that's treats it as a pool, because that's what this is. This is an insurance pool, a pool of funds that everybody contributes into. So that's my perspective on it. Any other additional discussion on the matter? Okay, if that's the case, we have a motion on the floor. I think we could proceed to a roll call vote.
Patrick McCaffrey.
Aye.
Joseph Como.
Aye.
Tricia Mann.
Aye.
Steve Edlin.
No.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. Okay, moving on to the 5th action item tonight, the approval of monthly vouchers. I'm sure everybody received their monthly vouchers. And were there any questions submitted?
No, they were not.
Okay. Any comments on the monthly vouchers from Mr. Como?
I move to approve the vouchers as presented.
Mr. Como has moved to approve the vouchers as presented. Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Second from Mr. McCaffrey. Additional discussion from any committee members or board members on the vouchers? Okay, let's move right to the roll call vote on that. Cindy?
Joseph Como.
Aye.
Steve Edlin.
Aye.
Tricia Mann.
Aye.
Patrick McCaffrey.
Aye.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. That concludes our action items for tonight. Now we'll move to the information items. We have a monthly budget update from the administration.
And I'll turn that over to Joe Sikora.
First of all, in local sources, property taxes in the amount of $409,000 were received during May. And then the fiscal year-to-date property taxes collected represent 81% of the adopted levy, compared to 79% through the same period last year. And then just going down to the second page of the financial, which is our state sources and our federal sources. If you look at the federal revenue through state sources, you'll see that a $746,000 Medicaid cost settlement from 2011-12 was received. And prior year Medicaid cost settlements are now credited to the general fund for DPI. So that's changed this year. And then in other financing sources and other revenues, there's no activity. So overall in the general fund, fiscal year to date, the district has received 71.06% of the annual revenues anticipated, compared to 70.45% last year. Then now going to page 3 of the financial, if you look at the district under salaries and benefits, the district has spent 77.85% of the budgeted amount for salaries year to date, compared to 77.81% last year. And the difference in salaries on a year-to-date basis is just due to the timing of the teacher retro payments. The last year teacher retro pay was accrued at the end of 2012-13, and this year the retro pay was completed in March. In our health claims payable analysis, that's been attached for your review and been distributed. So if we're going on to the next page of the financial, page 4, we would look at our gas, these are the two same items as last F&F meeting, our purchase services. Our gas utility costs have increased 53% year-to-date. And then combining both regular and special education fund pupil transportation and fuel invoices, the year-to-date reduction from last year is $927,000 or 15.2%. Going to our debt retirement, the first of the 3 installments of the Cisco phone lease totaling $488,000 was paid in May. So overall in Fund 10, the district has spent $97.4 million or 66.09% of the budget as of May 2014, compared to $94.55 million or 68.12% expended by the same time last year. In Fund 27, which is our special education fund, that's also been included for your review. The district has spent 75.47% of the budgeted amount for salaries year-to-date, compared to 76.43% last year. And then also in purchase services, where we received the bulk of our savings in pupil transportation and fuel expenses from last year, that's decreased $709,000 or 26.41%. So overall in the special education fund, expenditures year-to-date are $20.43 million or 73.84%, compared to $21.49 million or 76.46% last year. And that concludes our review of the May F&F month-to-date report.
Is there any questions from the committee members for the administration? Mr. Como.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Couple comments and question. Why don't I start with the question? Cash flow wise, are we still doing fine and we're going to finish out the year? Will we have to make any other plans?
No, we're ahead of schedule, so we're looking really well.
Okay, good. And I just wanted to point out one thing on the revenue side from a local source. TID number 7 in the city of Waukesha did close, and we did receive some monies back for that. And you know, we did not spend all those monies for that particular project, so that just speaks well to how well that project was managed, and we did benefit by $274,000 plus on that. So our hats are off to the city and those involved with that project.
We like to see those TID closures. They
Yes.
typically bring in a little windfall, so
Yes.
they're always nice.
Any other questions for administration? Okay, having none, thank you for the report, Joe. I appreciate that. Very well done. Let's move on to the information item number 2, 2013-2014 membership audit results.
In your packet was the results of our membership audit. At the state level, DPI dictates what districts get audited. And the audits we're talking about are our third Friday in September pupil count, our second Friday in January pupil count, and our summer school ADMs, average daily membership. And so the selection process is that at least once in every 4-year cycle, you should be selected. It doesn't mean once every 4 years. It means the state has a 4-year window, and you could be in year 1 of that 4-year window, and then the next 4-year cycle comes out, and you could be in year 4. So you really, in theory, could go almost, 7 years between them. So this is the first one that's been held, or that we've been selected for since I've been in Waukesha. The report is attached. At your desks are it's one sheet back to back. It's part of the report. It contains student names, which is why we did not make it a public record. So when you're done, I would take those back from you. So as you look at the report, we had one adjustment with the September count. Just a student who got counted twice, one of those dual enrolled type of things. With our Zangle system, we have struggled with some of our non-conventional types of attendance like eAchieve. And so we have kept that on a separate standalone system, and then the person who oversees our third Friday count has to pull all these databases together and consolidate them. And so we had one child who was duly enrolled and didn't get caught in the process, so we double counted that child. Our real issue came in the January count, and you'll see there's a long list there. What happened is when they went to file the final report for January, when she pulled the database, she inadvertently grabbed a draft from September instead of the correct database, and so the numbers obviously didn't match. And so once it was discovered what had happened, a lot of these aren't really errors. If we had filed the right data, we wouldn't have had all these exceptions. So it's trying to reconcile the wrong database and coming up with a report, and that's why it looks like there's so many errors. But there were a few. We miscounted the early childhood, or a 4K program is another one where we just have some of those students who are at community partners that it's separate standalone records that have to get fed into our system. And so we are very hopeful that when we get with Infinite Campus, a lot of those problems will be eliminated. And then the final area where you see where we had a finding was in our summer school area. Statutes are very clear that you can't charge students to attend summer school, but you can charge them for the materials that they're going to get. We have individual fees tied to various classes, and at the reconciliation, when it was all done, we discovered that some staff members just simply either didn't submit receipts and didn't claim for reimbursement, so therefore there wasn't a cost, or they didn't spend as much as they thought they initially were going to. So to reconcile that, we discovered, those that where there were no costs, we did a refund, or are in the process of doing a refund. There's about $33,000 that we're giving back. In that reconciliation, we apparently had a few that weren't totally matched up, where they didn't spend out the entire amount. I honestly thought the state would say, you've got some that are over, some that are under. You're close. Next year, make sure you come in better. They actually dinged us for those that were overspent course by course. They actually looked at it. So they reduced our total count from 160 ADM to 156. So we lost 4. That goes into our revenue cap formula. Because we are in declining enrollment, it doesn't change the 2013-14 total revenue available to us. We will see the impact in 14-15 because it'll adjust our base down a little bit lower. So we won't see a penalty this year because of that. After all that.
Any questions for administration? Mr. Como?
You alluded that you hope that Infinite Campus is going to help with the multiple databases that currently exist. Do you have a sense of how many databases we pulled from and which ones we might be able to eliminate due to Infinite Campus? Do you have a sense of that yet?
I believe we can eliminate all of the auxiliary ones if we insist that our staff members use it. It'll be a change for some of our sites, and some of them tend to have, they're used to operating in a certain way. So it'll be an administrative directive on our end that we have to insist.
And I would assume that that would need to be obviously coordinated with our technology, our chief information officer.
Yes.
And I would assume that our CIO would be in favor of just using the one system and having, as opposed to having these multiple ones?
Definitely.
Okay.
We're really looking forward to having one set of strong, reliable data instead of
That makes sense.
different.
And from a cost perspective, it costs money to maintain multiple databases. So although, we've been using these various databases for a number of years, sometimes those changes are for positive reasons, so.
Yes, to give you an example, we had, our food service was on a standalone module, and we now are going to pull that in under Infinite Campus as well. So we had this separate database that tracked like free and reduced lunch that wasn't tied in with our system, and it really made some of our data questionable. Did it get updated? Did it not? Do I pull it from here? Do I pull it from there? So.
And just
I, for
broader
one, am just
statistics should
really
be
looking forward to
better.
Exactly.
So, okay.
one main source of data for everybody.
Any other questions for administration from the committee members? Okay, Ms. Clifton, I think the only thing I'd like to add to that is, I did make a comment that we were in the audit, that we didn't respond only as we were required to with our count in January until we were asked for it per the audit. I think that seemed to be a little bit of a process shortcoming on our part that we'll have to make sure we correct going forward. Is that correct?
Well, I think part of the confusion came in that they kept trying to do this reconciliation, and our student services person just couldn't get it to work. So it wasn't that she wasn't trying to do a reconciliation for them, but she was using bad data and trying to figure out why they wouldn't match. And it took quite a while for her to realize that the data that she was trying to tie and that we had shared with them wasn't the accurate data. So that pushed us really right out to the wire. And then we also had one of our newer auditors on staff doing the membership audit for us. And so they didn't discover until it was going through partner review that he had missed the reconciliation for the courses, the course fees for the summer school. And so that was on April 30th, mid-afternoon, we got a phone call, and the state deadline is May 1st. Could we give you this reconciliation? We hadn't been asked for it at all, and we just simply didn't think to do it, that it was a requirement. It hadn't been brought up prior to that, so that was a timing thing, and we just couldn't respond fast enough.
So just to be clear, is there any change in administrative direction or policy resulting from that audit, the auditor's comments that we would be expected going forward?
Yes, we will initiate another step in the review process. So when those claims are filed, the state count date claims, before the final okay is sent, they have to be on my desk. So I have to see them to verify that I believe they're accurate as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for administration on this issue? Okay, that completes our information items and leads us right to, we'd have no discussion items tonight. We're collecting this information we can't keep. Make sure we collect all that. So we do have an executive session item tonight to go into.
We do have one closed session item for tonight.
I'd entertain a motion from someone in the committee for executive session. Mr. Como?
I move to adjourn to executive session per Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for the purpose of discussion of pool rental agreement.
Do I have a second for that motion? I have a second from Mr. Edlin.
Second.
This is a roll call item, I believe? Yes? Good thing I have someone here to make sure I don't get this muffed up. Please go ahead with the roll call.
Steve Edlin,
Aye.
Patricia Madden,
Aye.
Patrick McCaffrey.
Aye.
Joseph Como,
Aye.
Kurt O'Brien.
Aye. So we will adjourn to executive session.